The most dangerous wounds are the ones we choose to ignore, the ones disguised as love, as concern, as family loyalty. I still remember Martha's face across our shared fence last spring, her voice dropping to that particular tone people use when they're about to say something they know you don't want to hear. "There's something about her that isn't right, Helen," she'd said, eyes darting toward my son's car in the driveway where Vanessa sat waiting, her perfect profile visible through the passenger window. "The way she looked at your family photo albums when you weren't in the room, not like someone admiring memories, but like someone taking inventory." I laughed it off, called Martha overprotective, defensive of our 30-year friendship. I told her new daughters-in-law always feel threatening to mothers who've been the only woman in their son's life. But at night, alone in my kitchen with only the refrigerator's hum for company, I would replay her words while washing dishes, wondering why they left my hands trembling, why they found such fertile ground in the soil of my unacknowledged doubts. The silence around my concerns grew like ivy on abandoned brick, gradual, persistent, transforming the structure beneath until the original foundation became unrecognizable. I said nothing when heirloom jewelry began disappearing from my dresser drawers, nothing when my son stopped visiting alone, nothing when financial discussions suddenly required Vanessa's presence, nothing when decisions about my late husband's workshop tools were made without consulting me. Each small surrender seemed reasonable in isolation. This is what families do, I told myself. They blend and adjust. They make room for new members, new ways. But in the deep quiet of 3 a.m. insomnia, another voice whispered beneath my justifications, "This is how erasure begins." Not with dramatic confrontation, but with 1,000 small concessions, each one too insignificant to fight over, until one morning you wake up and realize you've become a guest in your own life. There was a moment, just one, when I nearly spoke up. We were sorting through old photographs for my son's 40th birthday celebration, and Vanessa picked up the faded Polaroid of my husband holding newborn Michael on the hospital's worn vinyl chair. "We should get this digitized and enhanced," she said, slipping it into her purse before I could respond. Something in her casual possession of that irreplaceable moment crystallized my unease into clarity. I opened my mouth to object, to reclaim what wasn't hers to take, when my son placed his hand over mine. "Mom, Vanessa's just trying to preserve it," he said, his eyes pleading for harmony, for the peace I'd always prioritized in our family. The words dissolved on my tongue, replaced by the familiar taste of acquiescence. Later that night, Martha called to check on me, as if she'd somehow sensed that threshold moment from across our adjoining yards. "It's not too late to set boundaries," she said when I confessed my growing unease. But even as she spoke, documents were being drawn up across town, decisions were being made in offices I'd never visited, and the clock on my independence was ticking down to 0. What would you do if you realized that the barriers between concern and paranoia, between protection and control, were far thinner than you'd believed? If the line separating maternal anxiety from legitimate alarm had blurred beyond recognition? I began keeping notes, small records of inconsistencies in Vanessa's stories, of comments that didn't align with previous versions, of mysterious phone calls taken on our back porch where she thought no one could hear. I hid these notes inside my old recipe box, between index cards stained with vanilla extract and butter fingerprints. Was I becoming the suspicious mother-in-law of sitcom cliches, manufacturing problems where none existed? Or was I finally paying attention to what had been in front of me since that first dinner, when Vanessa asked such specific questions about my husband's life insurance, about the property deed, about whether I'd considered downsizing to something more manageable? Martha urged me to talk to Michael alone, to ask direct questions about changes to my accounts I hadn't authorized, about the lawyer's appointment scheduled without my knowledge. But every time an opportunity arose, Vanessa was there, a constant presence, her hand on my son's arm, her voice inserting itself into any moment that might have allowed for truth between us. Tomorrow they're coming to help me pack for what they're calling a temporary move to the guest house behind their newly purchased home. The home purchased, I strongly suspect, with funds that once belonged to me. The papers I signed 2 months ago during what I thought was a routine meeting about property taxes sit heavily in my memory, their contents now far less clear than they seemed when presented by Vanessa's cousin, the notary who arrived with documents just needing a few signatures. Martha will be watching from her window as they load my life into labeled boxes, her warning now a prophecy fulfilled rather than avoided. What she doesn't know, what none of them know, is that before my husband died, he left one final gift hidden where only I would think to look, a safeguard against exactly this scenario he somehow anticipated, despite never meeting the woman who would eventually necessitate it. When Vanessa opens that specific drawer tomorrow, when she finds what waits beneath the false bottom my carpenter husband crafted decades ago, everything will change in ways none of us can reverse or deny. Some revelations arrive too late to prevent damage, but perhaps just in time to ensure justice. The kitchen window rattles against the wind as I pack 35 years of cooking memories into boxes too small to hold them. Morning light catches on the crystal salt cellar Richard gave me our first Christmas, now wrapped in newspaper that turns my fingertips gray, like everything else in this house since the betrayal. My son Michael stands in the doorway, arms crossed, monitoring my packing as if I might steal something. The irony would make me laugh if it didn't make me want to scream instead. "Mom, you're taking too long," he says, checking his watch. The same watch his father left him. The one he once said he'd never wear because it represented Dad's obsession with time over people. Now he wears it every day, another inheritance claimed before its time. I fold dish towels embroidered with my grandmother's initials, wondering how many hands they've dried across generations, how many tears they've absorbed. The kitchen smells of coffee and pine sol. Michael's wife Jenny has been cleaning behind me as I pack, erasing my fingerprints, my DNA, my existence from the countertops before I've even left. She says it's to get a head start on the deep clean, but we both know it's a performance of efficiency masking the indecency of their haste. 3 months ago, they invited me to dinner to discuss the future. Their voices gentle, rehearsed, as they explained how I couldn't possibly manage this big house alone, how moving in with them would be best for everyone, how they could rent out my house for additional income to support my care. They'd already contacted a real estate agent. They'd already measured for new furniture. The copper bottom pots hang on their rack, reflecting distorted versions of us all. Me, smaller in the curved metal. Michael, stretched taller. Jenny, wider at the edges. I reach for the large stock pot where I've made Christmas soup every December 24th since before Michael was born. "That one's staying," Jenny says quickly. "It's part of the kitchen, really. As if copper and steel could grow roots, become fixtures, earn more right to remain than the woman who polished them monthly for 3 decades. I notice she doesn't meet my eyes when she says this, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder, perhaps on the future version of this room where my ghost has been successfully exorcised. The refrigerator door is a museum of vanishing moments, school photos, Christmas cards, Michael's wedding invitation, my granddaughter Lily's crayon drawing of our family. I remove each magnet carefully, each memory a small weight in my palm. "You don't need to take all that, Mom," Michael says with artificial patience. "We have plenty of photos at our place." What he doesn't understand is that I'm not collecting images. I'm gathering evidence of a life they've decided is too inconvenient to continue. A life deemed less valuable than square footage and rental potential. I say nothing as I place the magnets in a small box marked personal. Some battles aren't worth the breath they'd cost. Jenny opens cabinet doors, inventorying what will stay with the house. "For the rental value," she explains, as if I haven't understood the plan they've presented as my only option. My fingers trace the edge of the kitchen table, solid oak that Richard and I found at a flea market the summer I was pregnant with Michael. We refinished it together during hot July evenings, my swollen belly pressed against its edge as we worked. 3 generations have eaten Sunday dinners at this table. It has hosted wedding showers and funeral gatherings, homework sessions and tax preparations. Now it's just another asset in their spreadsheet calculations. The knife block sits empty on the counter, the good knives already packed away. By Jenny, not by me. "For safekeeping," she said this morning, though neither of us acknowledge the unspoken assumption that grief might make me dangerous, that age might make me unstable, that loss might make me unpredictable. The kitchen feels suddenly airless, the walls contracting around us. Through the window, I can see the oak tree Richard planted when we moved in, now tall enough to shade half the yard. Unlike me, it will be allowed to stay, to continue growing old in the place where it put down roots. I reach into my pocket, feeling the hard edge of the house key I had secretly duplicated last week. A small act of rebellion, a tiny reclamation of agency. They don't know about the deed hidden in my sister's apartment, or about the appointment with a lawyer next Tuesday, or about the 3 decades of careful financial planning that Richard and I did to ensure this house would always be our sanctuary. They see only an aging widow taking too long to pack her kitchen, not a woman quietly plotting to reclaim what was never theirs to take. Tell me, if your children decided your home was suddenly theirs to control, would you go quietly, or would you also feel that first spark of revolution igniting beneath your grief? The afternoon sun stretches across the living room floor, illuminating dust particles that dance in the air like memories refusing to settle. The boxes are stacked by the fireplace now. Donate, storage, and the painfully small collection marked keep. Michael and Jenny have stepped out to get more packing tape, leaving me alone for the first time today. The silence in this room feels unfamiliar after hours of their efficient commands and muffled discussions about what's worth keeping. I sink into my reading chair, the one Richard reupholstered for my 50th birthday, the one Jenny has already listed on an online marketplace. The worn armrests cradle my hands like old friends saying goodbye. How strange that fabric and wood can offer more loyalty than flesh and blood. The mantel clock ticks steadily, marking time as it has since Richard's parents gave it to us as a wedding gift. Michael wants to take it to his house, has already spoken about where it would look perfect in their entryway. He doesn't know that the clock is actually a vessel, that behind its face, tucked into a space Richard cleverly engineered, rests the original deed to this house, the one that names me as sole owner, the one transferred into my name alone 2 years before Richard's death, a precaution he insisted upon that I didn't understand then. Families can surprise you when money's involved, he'd said, his voice carrying the weight of something he'd witnessed but never fully explained. The clock keeps perfect time and perfect secrets, waiting for the moment when both will be revealed. The photo albums lie open on the coffee table where Jenny was organizing them earlier, separating images she deemed worth digitizing from those apparently too mundane to preserve. She's removed several already, photographs of places and people she doesn't recognize, moments that shaped our family story but mean nothing to someone cataloging value rather than memory. My fingers trace the empty spaces in the album pages, the ghostly rectangles where images once lived. How easily a life can be edited, curated to fit someone else's narrative about who you were, what matters, which parts of your existence deserve continuation. I close the album quietly, slipping it into my tote bag when no one is watching. Some treasures must be smuggled to safety. The bookshelves stand half empty now, their contents sorted according to Jenny's assessment of what constitutes valuable versus outdated. My poetry collections, volumes I've annotated throughout decades of reading and rereading, have been boxed for donation, while Richard's leather-bound classics remain displayed like trophies. These are first editions, Mom, Michael explained when I questioned the disparity. They're actually worth something. The unspoken corollary hung in the air between us. Unlike your paperbacks, unlike your preferences, unlike perhaps you yourself, I've rescued a few treasured volumes, hiding them between clothing layers in my suitcase, embarrassed by the need to smuggle my own possessions out of my own home, yet unwilling to fight battles that would paint me as the difficult mother-in-law they already believe me to be. The window overlooks the backyard where Lily, my 7-year-old granddaughter, is playing with the neighbor's dog. She doesn't understand what's happening, only that Grandma is coming to live in their guest house, that will have so many sleepovers now. Her innocence is both balm and wound. Michael and Jenny have presented this entire arrangement as something I should be grateful for, as if taking my home, my independence, and my dignity is an act of generosity rather than appropriation dressed as concern. When did my son begin seeing me as a problem to solve rather than a person to respect? When did his wife's assessment of my capabilities become more authoritative than my own lived experience? The questions circle without resolution as I watch Lily's uncomplicated joy. Her world still safely intact while mine disintegrates behind walls she perceives as permanent. The sound of their car in the driveway signals the end of my momentary solitude. I straighten in my chair, compose my features into the mask of compliant gratitude they expect. The legal papers I discovered last week, copies of power of attorney documents I supposedly signed, financial statements showing accounts I never authorized, remain hidden in my sister's apartment across town, waiting for Tuesday's appointment with the lawyer Martha recommended. "Document everything," she whispered over our fence yesterday. "And don't sign anything else." The living room holds decades of conversations, arguments, reconciliations, celebrations, the invisible architecture of a family's emotional life. These walls have witnessed vows made and broken, truths spoken and concealed. If they could speak, would they testify to the slow, subtle shift from protection to possession, from concern to control? Would you recognize the moment when care transforms into something darker? When love becomes the justification for actions that feel nothing like love when you're on the receiving end? The evening light casts long shadows across the bedroom, turning familiar objects into strange silhouettes as I fold the last of my clothing into suitcases too small to hold a life. The mattress has been stripped. Sheets bundled for the linen closet Jenny has already reorganized according to her system, color-coded, precisely folded, all evidence of my housekeeping methods erased like footprints on a beach at high tide. The dresser drawers hang open, emptied of the garments I've accumulated through decades of ordinary living, now sorted into piles that reflect other people's assessment of what remains valuable, what deserves continuation, what can be discarded without consultation or ceremony. The mirror above the dresser reflects a woman I sometimes struggle to recognize, someone caught between resistance and resignation, between the dignity of protest and the exhaustion of constant justification for occupying space that was once unquestionably hers. Michael appears in the doorway, his figure momentarily superimposed over the ghost of Richard, who used to lean there every evening watching me prepare for bed. A ritual of comfortable intimacy built through 42 years of marriage. "Jenny's making lists of what still needs to be packed tomorrow," he says, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced efficiency that has characterized this entire process. "We should be able to finish by noon if we stay organized. The timeline has been determined without my input, the schedule arranged for their convenience rather than my emotional readiness. How quickly my son has transformed from the boy who once sought my approval into a man who issues directives about the dismantling of my life with clinical detachment. When did my opinions become optional considerations rather than necessary components of decisions affecting my existence? The question sits unasked between us, another in the growing collection of conversations we aren't having, truths we aren't acknowledging, recognitions we're both avoiding for different reasons. The nightstand holds the last items not yet categorized for relocation or removal. My reading glasses, the novel I've been too distracted to finish, the silver frame containing the last photograph taken of Richard before illness transformed him from husband to patient. My fingers trace the edge of the drawer where the false bottom waits, concealing documents I discovered 3 days ago, while searching for the earrings that have mysteriously disappeared from my jewelry box. Papers bearing signatures I don't recognize, authorizing changes to accounts I established, transfers I never approved, arrangements made in my name but without my knowledge or consent. The evidence sits protected by my husband's carpentry skills, by his foresight in creating hiding places even our son doesn't know exist, by his understanding that sometimes protection requires concealment rather than confrontation. Jenny's voice carries from downstairs, her tone alternating between the sugary sweetness she adopts when instructing me about my own possessions and the clipped efficiency she uses when speaking to Michael about practical matters. Their conversation drifts upward in fragments, phrases about property values and rental potential, about renovation timelines and storage solutions, about managing expectations and maintaining appropriate boundaries. The clinical language of appropriation disguised as care, of possession masked as protection, of control presented as concern. The bed frame where I conceived their father, where I nursed him through final stages of cancer, where I rebuilt myself after his death, has been sold online. It wouldn't fit in the guest house, Mom, and the money will help with moving expenses. The transaction completed without consultation, the decision presented as accomplished fact rather than proposal requiring discussion, the proceeds already allocated toward costs I never agreed to incur. The envelope from the lawyer Martha recommended sits between layers of clothing in the suitcase. Appointment card for Tuesday morning. Contact information for the advocate she believes can help me reclaim what was never voluntarily surrendered. List of documents needed to establish that transfers made were neither authorized nor legitimate. The packet feels simultaneously heavy with potential consequences and light with possibility of reclamation, of restoration, of return to autonomy gradually eroded through series of small surrenders that seemed individually reasonable but collectively devastating. The bedroom windows reflect streetlights now illuminating against approaching darkness. The same view I've woken to for 35 years. The same patterns of light and shadow that have marked mornings of ordinary living, now categorized as too much house, too much responsibility, too much independence for woman presumed incapable of managing what she's successfully maintained for decades. The sound of footsteps on the stairs signals Jenny's approach, her perfume reaching the room before she physically appears in the doorway. Expensive scent that somehow always makes my throat constrict. My eyes water slightly, as if body recognizes intrusion mind has been conditioned to accept. "We need to talk about the jewelry," she says without preamble, without acknowledgement that these conversations might carry emotional weight beyond practical considerations of asset management. "I've been thinking it would be safer if we kept the valuable pieces in our safe until you're settled." The presumption leaves me momentarily speechless. The casual reference to valuables that hold significance beyond market assessment. The assumption of authority over items representing not just material worth, but connections to history now deemed more appropriately managed by someone with no relationship to their origins or meaning. Have you ever stood in a room that has witnessed your most intimate moments while someone who barely knows you catalogs its contents according to their assessment of what deserves preservation? Have you felt the peculiar weightlessness that comes when foundations you believed solid reveal themselves to be conditional, temporary, subject to revocation by those who claim to act from love while demonstrating something that feels remarkably like its opposite? The desk lamp creates a small island of light in the darkness that has settled over Richard's study. The last room to be packed, the space most resistant to the efficient dismantling occurring throughout the rest of the house. Midnight finds me sitting in his leather chair, surrounded by what remains of his presence 3 years after cancer took him. Books still arranged according to his system. Papers filed in cabinets that reflect his methodical nature. The scent of his aftershave somehow lingering in fabric and wood despite time's passage. The house sleeps around me, Michael and Jenny having retired to the guest room hours ago. Their day's work of categorizing my life into disposable and retainable portions temporarily suspended until morning brings renewal of their mission to simplify my existence. The quiet wraps around me like a familiar blanket, offering comfort that has become increasingly rare as voices not my own determine what happens within these walls. The bottom drawer of Richard's desk slides open silently on tracks he oiled religiously, the mechanism still functioning perfectly despite years of disuse. Beneath the hanging files, invisible unless you know exactly where to press, the false bottom releases with barely audible click. Another of his clever adaptations. Another secret space created by hands that understood the importance of privacy, of protection, of preparation for contingencies. Others might dismiss as paranoia, but experience had taught him were merely foresight. The papers I discovered 3 days ago lie exactly as I left them, organized in Richard's precise manner. Bank statements showing transfers made without my authorization, power of attorney documents bearing signatures that approximate mine, but contain subtle differences only someone intimately familiar with my handwriting would notice. Application for guardianship filed with family court listing cognitive decline, never diagnosed by any physician I visited. The evidence assembles itself into narrative more calculated than I initially understood. Not impulsive opportunism, but methodical appropriation planned over months, if not years. implemented through series of small steps designed to seem individually reasonable, while collectively achieving transfer of control so gradual I might not notice until completion rendered resistance impossible. My fingers trace Richard's handwriting on the envelope he left in this secret compartment. In case of emergency, written in the distinctive script that once signed anniversary cards, grocery lists, permission slips for school field trips. Inside, instructions written 3 months before his death, directions to accounts established without Michael's knowledge, copies of deeds transferred solely to my name, contact information for lawyer who helped arrange protections. Richard somehow anticipated might become necessary despite having never met Jenny, never witnessing the gradual transformation of our son from protective to possessive. The study window reflects my ghostly image superimposed over darkness outside, woman caught between worlds, between identities, between resignation and resistance. The decision solidified tonight wasn't prompted by single dramatic revelation, but accumulation of small recognitions that eventually crystallized into clarity impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The realization that protection can become prison when implemented without consent, that concern can become control when extended without consultation, that love can become possession when expressed through management rather than support. The document in my hands represents choice between continued surrender to narrative created about me or reclamation of authority to write my own story, to determine my own capabilities, to maintain autonomy gradually eroded through seemingly benevolent intervention never actually requested or required. The laptop Richard left hidden beneath false floor and closet, device unknown to Michael or Jenny, connected to accounts established as contingency against exactly this scenario, glows softly on desk surface as emails transmit documents to lawyer Martha recommended, to advocate specializing in elder rights, to financial investigator who will trace transactions made without authorization or knowledge. The study door remains closed, computer screen angled away from potential observation should unexpected interruption occur, every precaution taken against discovery that would trigger accelerated implementation of plans already well advanced, despite lacking legitimacy beyond documents bearing signatures I never actually provided. The digital evidence creates backup to physical documentation secured at Martha's house. Redundancy Richard always insisted upon. Protection existing in multiple locations, ensuring survival of truth, regardless of what might happen to any single repository. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes twice. Sound penetrating closed door, marking time that continues its forward progress regardless of human dramas unfolding within its measurement. In 5 hours, Michael and Jenny will resume packing, will continue transformation of home into house, will proceed with arrangements for relocation they've presented as supportive while implementing without genuine participation. In 9 hours, movers will arrive to transport furniture I've lived with for decades to storage unit whose location I haven't been told, whose access requires key I haven't been given, whose contents represent physical manifestation of life being systematically repositioned beyond my reach. In 27 hours, I have appointment with lawyer whose eyes widened upon reviewing documents Martha helped me gather, whose assessment transformed from professional interest to personal indignation upon recognizing pattern familiar from previous cases, where concern provided convenient cover for control never legitimately established. Have you ever recognized moment when acceptance transforms into clarity, when resignation gives way to resolve, when quiet compliance suddenly reveals itself as active choice rather than inevitable surrender? Have you discovered that dignity sometimes requires risk? That reclaiming voice silenced through 1,000 small accommodations sometimes demands speaking truth, certain to be initially dismissed but ultimately impossible to deny, when supported by evidence carefully preserved against day when performance of gratitude finally becomes too costly to maintain? The porch swing sways gently in the evening breeze, its familiar creak a counterpoint to crickets emerging with early summer twilight. 6 months since the locks were restored, since belongings returned to places almost right, but never quite the same, since family redefined itself through choices made and consequences accepted, rather than bonds assumed and expectations maintained without examination. The wisteria, Richard, planted 15 years ago, has finally reached the arbor's peak, its purple blooms cascading down columns like memories finding their proper place. Beautiful despite origins in conflict, fragrant beyond proportion to their size, persistent through seasons of dormancy and flourishing with equal determination. Tonight, the porch light remains unlit, allowing starlight to cast subtle illumination across floorboards that have witnessed homecomings and departures, celebrations and losses. The ordinary passages that accumulate into what we call a life when viewed through distance only time can provide. The dining room table inside no longer stretches to accommodate Sunday gatherings that gradually ceased after the attorney's office revelation, after documentation demonstrated priority of property over presence, of possession over connection. The empty chairs speak their own language of absence, not just physical removal, but emotional vacancy that opened slowly as understanding deepened that certain fractures cannot be mended through pretense or performance, through words contradicted by actions revealing values fundamentally different from those claimed through expressions of concern, masking considerations more calculated than the love I believed central to our shared story. Michael still calls on birthdays and holidays, his voice carrying that particular strain of someone navigating territory forever, altered by truth impossible to unknow once revealed through necessity rather than choice. His children visit occasionally, innocence in adult conflict they sense but cannot fully comprehend. Their presence both comfort and reminder of continuity that persists despite disruption, of connections that transcend transactions measured through material value rather than meaning accumulated across generations. The family Bible rests open on the side table beside my reading chair, its pages turned to passages about inheritance, not just physical property, but wisdom transmitted, values demonstrated, priorities revealed through actions rather than claimed through words contradicted by choices made when opportunity appeared. Richard's letter remains tucked between these pages, his handwriting increasingly precious as tangible evidence of presence now existing only in memory and artifacts preserved through deliberate intention rather than casual accumulation. The hospice nurse called last week, her continuing friendship unexpected gift emerging from circumstances that revealed priorities with clarifying precision, impossible during ordinary interactions protected by social convention and assumed understanding. Martha from next door brings weekly casseroles despite my protests, her practical compassion demonstrating community extending beyond bloodlines, her presence reminder that connections can form through shared experience rather than shared DNA, through recognition of humanity rather than obligation of relation. The key to my front door hangs from the same keychain it has for 26 years, its familiar weight against my palm when returning from grocery shopping or neighborhood walks, a reminder that security exists in multiple forms: legal documentation proving ownership, physical access maintained through locks matching original key, emotional certainty established through truth revealed rather than fiction maintained for comfort or convenience. The hallway photographs have been rearranged, timeline no longer chronological, but curated through meaning discovered rather than assumed, through connections revealed as genuine rather than performed for appearance. Some frames stand empty, space is maintained as recognition that certain images require reconsideration. When context changes, when understanding deepens, when priorities previously hidden emerge through actions taken when opportunity revealed values different from those claimed. Sarah's bedroom remains untouched, sacred space, honoring sister, whose absence created vulnerability, exploited but whose memory provides continuing comfort through recognition that some relationships prove themselves genuine, even when tested by circumstance beyond control or anticipation. The most valuable inheritance I've discovered isn't contained in property deeds or legal documents, but in the recognition that boundaries established through necessity often create clarity impossible during comfortable accommodation, that permits growth of assumptions unchallenged until crisis reveals what always existed beneath surfaces maintained through mutual agreement to see only what confirms beliefs we need rather than truths awaiting acknowledgement. Have you noticed how sometimes the most precious gift hidden within betrayal is the freedom that arrives when pretense becomes impossible? When relationships must either transform through honest reassessment or dissolve through continued performance, neither wishes to maintain once truth has illuminated what was always present, but carefully concealed behind expressions presented as love, but revealed as calculation, when opportunity suggested advantage available through temporary vulnerability.